Do you feel like your players aren't listening to you on Football Manager? Are you getting frustrated? Well, let me tell you something. Opposition instructions can help. They've changed a bit, and on today's show, I'm going to show you how I can set them up for a high pressing system or even a low block. What are opposition instructions? These are specific instructions given to individual players in your team targeting specific opposition players or anyone playing in a specific position. If someone had given me that explanation, I go, what? All right, basically, it's really simple to understand if you look at an opposition formation. Now, when you go into an opposition formation, you come to the tactics page, you'll see this opposition instruction. You look at this. These are all the players on the pitch, right? So if you come to this icon over here, this targets a specific player. You can do one of four things to that player. You can either tell any player he enters the zone off to tight mark, trigger press, tackle, or show onto foot. So what your players on the pitch are doing is very simple. If for some reason the goalkeeper decides, I want to play really high up the pitch and I'm going to come into the defensive zone of a defender, that defender is going to time mark him, trigger press, tackle, or show on the foot. So essentially how this works is a zonal instruction for players in your team. So they are looking specifically at opposition players and what they're doing. Now the AI is getting a bit smarter nowadays. It does tend to move players around, change their positions. So we have this instruction, it's positions. So now you're giving the same instructions to anyone who's playing in any of these positions at any time. And if he enters the zone of a player, that player is either going to trigger press him, tight mark him, tackle him, or show onto foot. So you basically got two ways you can set OIs, by player or by position. This, is from game to game. You can target specific players. It can be quite handy if there's a particular threat you're worried about. And this, positions is pretty cool because I'm the kind of guy that loves less is more. Right. So whenever I'm thinking of tactics, I want to make things a lot easier for myself so that I have to go in there and crack my head every time. So whenever I look at my systems, if I'm playing a low block, it's just one set of opposition instructions. If I'm playing a mid or a high block, it's another set of opposition instructions. How easy can that be? Whenever you want to execute a well-laid trap, you need to know whether two of your players are going to close down somebody or just one. And to understand that, you've got to look at this. This is called a zone of compression. Between the high line of engagement and much higher defensive line is basically where you want the opposition to play. Now, if you lower the defensive line, your zone becomes much bigger. When you do something like this and your zones are really big, players' zonal areas may not overlap. So you might end up seeing one player closing somebody down. So, sometimes he goes in and you might not find another player joining him. So you might get frustrated, wondering why your players aren't doubling up on the opposition player. You might have set this to maximum and you're still not seeing that effect. That's because your zones don't overlap. If you want the zones to overlap, you bring the defensive line closer. So your back line is actually closer to your midfield and your players are closer together. When you create traps, you might find more than one player going to close somebody down. And this is where the opposition instructions come into play. Now, when I set my opposition instructions, if I'm playing a low block, I don't want the back line to be pressed. I want them to come up the pitch so that we don't open our lines up too much. I want most of my players to hold their positions. Now, this means very simply, no one is going to take an advantage of a fullback making a mistake. So they're going to let the fullbacks come up the pitch. They're going to let the defenders come up the pitch. They're even going to let the DM come up the pitch because that's the way I've set it up. When they come into our half, if the wingers or the strikers make a mistake, then I want my players to snap on them through this trigger press. I want my players to be tight on those players when they enter our half. And I also want the central midfielders to be tackle hard. So I've set up a low block where I want my players to trap them aggressively. I've also got angles set up over here. Now here I've got a fullback with a show onto foot left. This is basically a pressing angle, right? So essentially what you're doing is you're telling your players, hey, don't let him go down the flanks. We want him to come inside. So he plays the ball to the central midfielders who we're going to hard tackle. So whenever I set these up like that, I'm creating a pressing angle. Now with the wingers, well, we don't want them cutting inside because they could, take our defenders on and pull them out of position. So since crosses are low XG chances, we just want them to cross the ball. So wingers are told to stay on their right foot. This winger playing on the left is told to stay on his left foot. And then, of course, at the tail end here with the strikers, we're just choosing one option, which is to show them onto a weaker foot. Opposition instructions can also work very well with the new pressing trap instructions that we have in the game. Here I've got trap inside and trap outside. Now, the thing about these trap instructions is pretty, you want to think about them before you use them. Even though you might have a numerical advantage, sometimes you may not even want to use a trap, because traps are basically an attempt by your team to show them into certain areas of the pitch. Now, if I trap them inside, what this does is I'm basically telling my team, hey, I want you to funnel the play through the center. We have a numerical advantage here. I want my players to do something. This is where those opposition instructions become very helpful. You might want to tell your team players to hard tackle specific players so that they complement the trap instructions that you set up. Similarly, a trap outside seeks to funnel play down the flanks. Here, once again, this can work very well with cross engagement. You could either draw their fullbacks higher up the pitch with an invite cross and then hard tackle them once they get there. Or you could stop the crosses at the source because your plan was to draw them up the pitch and then hard tackle them. But here you have to think about your counter attacks. If I personally don't like this instruction very much because it implies that I'm going to take advantage of the flanks. If I take advantage of the flanks because the fullbacks are high up the pitch, then I'm living off crosses, which lead to low XG chances in the area, which I hate this. I much rather trap inside because then I can use my playmakers. Maybe they'll put one through ball through and I can create a much better chance if it's my strikers attacking the area. So we've done low block. What about mid block and high block systems? So whenever I'm playing a gegen pressing system or even a mid block system, I want to take advantage of any mistake that the backline makes, and I will put pressure on that backline by using trigger press. So each time, anytime these players get the ball, they might make a mistake. If they make a mistake, players that are closest to them are going to snap and do something about it. And then we funnel play. The right fullback is shown to the left. That means I want to encourage him to come inside instead of going down the flanks looking for the winger. And then once they come inside and pass the ball, we hard tackle the central midfielders. Essentially the same thing. And here, once again, if I go into the tactics page and I go to the out of possession instructions, I can choose to either do a trap inside or a trap outside. Now, I normally sometimes just leave this unchecked because I find that the opposition instructions do a pretty good job if I'm playing with a narrow zone of compression like this one. Now, of course, when you go into the game, you've got other instructions like prevent shot, goalkeeper distribution. Now, please don't use that with a low block. You really want the opposition to come out, so you definitely don't want to be using the prevent shot, goalkeeper distribution. Now, if you have any more questions about opposition instructions, I do stream a few times a week. You can pop in on my streams and ask me anything you want, and I'll do my best to help you guys out. Meanwhile, you guys stay safe, take care of each other. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.